Hey guys, it's Captain Forrest here, and in today's video I'm going to be going over both these combatants to see who would win, more often not, in an inverse situation, Sentry versus Hyperion. Now if you guys are new to my channel, please leave a like, comment down below, and of course subscribe for further content. Also, shouts to the Cough Shop gang, they make awesome content, their links will be in the description. Also shouts to HQ Squad, massive shouts to Korin, huge help in this video, much appreciated to him and the rest of the team. So I'm going to go ahead, start off with Hyperion and see what he brings to the table. So Marcus Milton, the super being that would become known as Hyperion, came to Earth as a baby, sent as the only survivor of the race of Eternals from a dying world. A human named Father raised him under the name of Marcus Milton, teaching him the morals of society. As an adult, he became the superhero known as Hyperion and protected the world along with a team of superhumans known as the Squadron Supreme. One day, his universe and another started colliding. While he was trying to prevent the destruction of his reality, he was left in a void, his destroyed universe once occupied. As the only survivor floating in nothingness, the group of scientists known as AIM from another universe managed to pull him in to their reality. He spent most of his time in captivity until he was freed by the Avengers, who offered him a place in their ranks, and after working with the Avengers, he would go on to form the Squadron Supreme. Alright, let's move on to Hyperion's impressive feats. So Hyperion survived the destruction of two entire universes. One day, his universe and another started colliding. While he was trying to prevent the destruction of his reality, he was left in the void his destroyed universe once occupied, floating in nothingness. Hyperion was able to physically go at it with Hulk, and in fact take victory via causing Hulk to revert back to Banner after punching him really hard. Some more impressive feats for Hyperion was when he fought Namor and decapitated him with his heat vision. Another time was when he fought against Juggernaut and was able to physically hurt him and even carve off his helmet. Hyperion was also able to stalemate Moonstone in a beam struggle. This is impressive because Moonstone, back in the day, could toss up with Captain Marvel. Hyperion has also ripped the High Evolutionary's arm off, and they proceeded to go at it with each other. Now, let's go ahead and move on to Hyperion's abilities and other miscellaneous stuff. Hyperion has enhanced senses. He can hear the crack of skin cells from his students, hear someone drooling, dust mites running around their eyebrows, and hear screams from 18 miles away. Fine-tuned hearing he really does have. He can sense and detect life and see objects from far distances. Hyperion doesn't require the need to breathe, and Hyperion has his signature atomic heat vision, which he can use to vaporize his opponents down to the atomic to subatomic levels. His heat vision gets amped by the sun during the day, as he was able to carve off Juggernaut's helmet with his heat vision. Hyperion's heat vision is also radioactive too. Hyperion has also shown to use dirty tactics in combat, and lastly, Hyperion has type 3 mortality. He can heal his eyes and brain from worms that were consuming them. Okay, so that's going to round up Hyperion. I'm going to go ahead and move on and talk about Sentry and see what he brings to the table. So this is something extremely important to establish. The Sentry's power varies depending on his mental stability. This makes him go from Herald level to destroying Yggdrasil, Strange, and Eternity. Some people might argue this is an unquantifiable difference in strength, as we can't directly measure his stability, but we can use his showings within each of these instances as an underlying standard to distinguish between a stable and an unstable Sentry. Presuming the page itself doesn't make that clear, even if Sentry were to be mentally stable at any point in time, we still have to take into consideration him holding back a lot for ethical and collateral purposes. Another thing to take into consideration is his agoraphobia. This is the main cause of him staying outside of fights. The only thing he fears more than the void is his own power, as we've seen in World War Hulk. This also explains why when he does act, he doesn't expend the energies he's actually capable of expending, simply a sufficient amount to dispose of any threat. Sentry has demonstrated to completely embarrass Dr. Doom and absolutely shred through his force fields, with the latter being the actual feat. It is then repeated again that Sentry could do the exact same thing with no pressure in the following issue. He repeated twice to make it clear, literally from Iron Man, who wouldn't underestimate Vic Von Doom. The reasons this is so impressive is because his force fields were directly capable of shielding against and absorbing the energies of a mad celestial, making him survive an attack which completely embarrassed Galactus. They were completely unscathed by Captain Britain, who at that point was operating on a multiversal / omniversal level. He survived a direct blast from the IG, which is capable of tanking attacks from a Galactus who had the capability of destroying all realities, known and unknown, and all of time within a single thought. The Cosmic Cube was stated to be a fraction of Galactus's power too. They were stated to be completely superior to Susan's force fields, which were capable of withstanding attacks from the Celestials on 2 different instances. We know her force fields also depend on her mental prowess as well. At the very least, we know at her peak she could withstand an incursion too. In issue 383, Sorcerer Supreme Loki was stated to be a threat to the entire magical realm and the entirety of the multiverse by Stefan and Sentry. This is important because both Yggdrasil Strange, Void / Sentry have been repeatedly shown to be above him within the span of these 3 issues. Yggdrasil Strange was stated to be at his absolute peak, far superior to any other incarnation and form of Strange, with him being a god of magic relative to them simply being sorceresses, and him being much more. We can deduce the statement of more magic that I have ever known to mean 2 things. The statement is impersonal and external, relating to Strange's general observations. This would yield insanely, really, just crazy high results, since we could conclude Yggdrasil Strange was superior to quite literally any foe he faced before, not only his previous incarnations, and any form of those foes too. This statement is personal and internal, relating to Strange's observations, relating to his past selves, which would still yield insane results considering the innumerable amps Strange has gotten throughout the runs. This is the same Strange who Loki fought. Another thing to note is that Loki was still God of Stories at this point. God of Stories Loki has phenomenal feats, but to make it simple, this is not just Loki plus his Sorcerer Supreme mantle fighting. This is Loki plus Sorcerer Supreme plus God of Stories. While the fight was evidently Strange having the upper hand, we ought not ignore the contextual narrative implications we get throughout the fight, as we see both on panel and dialogue, which we can inductively reason off. Loki was able to contend with the Strange, directly tanking a blast, seemingly swapping hands with him in a last panel, and not being afraid of Strange being amped by Yggdrasil, and still willing to fight. While Loki is egotistical, he has another predicate which is even more dominant, which is his intellect. He knows when to fight or when to utilize his cunningness, and we can already tell the approach he took here. So based off this, we can conclude that Sorcerer Supreme God of Stories Loki is capable of contending with Yggdrasil Strange to some extent. Another thing to take into consideration is that Sentry, who was quite literally asleep, acted as a conduit for Yggdrasil Strange's magic, pretty much his power. This is self-explanatory and does not require anything else. You might be wondering, why is it so important to establish this Loki to be so powerful? It's because the Void completely embarrassed the same Loki, as well as Doctor Strange, and Sentry was capable of damaging the Void and holding it off. So that's absolutely insane scaling, some really insane scaling right there. We've also seen Sentry contain the energies of a disabled Cosmic Cube in his earlier years. Sentry has obviously gotten stronger, far more stronger since then. Absorbing Man, who can absorb the powers of a cosmic cube, Odin, Galactus, power which can destroy Scarlet Witch, Wiccan, and Dormammu, couldn't handle Sentry, giving him all his power, and basically collapsed on himself. Even with a mere fraction, he literally flat out states he thinks Sentry is God himself with these powers, which is absolutely insane. Like, not even the Absorbing Man could handle such power from Sentry. So you're probably wondering, what about Merge Sentry? Well, let's talk about him. For those who don't know, Reynolds finally decided to embrace the nature of his other half for the first time, rather than continue to fight its warring parts. This resulted in the creation of Merge Sentry. Speaking of Billy, aka Scout, Merge Sentry snapped his neck. Keep in mind, Scout became the new Sentry and was previously overpowering the original Sentry before he became whole. So right there and there, got some crazy scaling for Sentries, just really good scaling for Sentry. Now for speed, it's pretty self-explanatory. Scaling wise, Sentry should easily have irrelevant speed naturally, due to the nature of him being at such a high level of AP. So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the Sentry's hacks and abilities and all that good stuff. So for starters, Sentry has been able to manipulate matter and molecules. We've seen Sentry use this to stop Mjolnir and drop it to the ground. I think it would be also a good idea to talk about the fight between Molecule Man and Sentry. The fight has caused a lot of controversy, with many people labeling it as plot-induced stupidity or coming up with their own theories. We do know that the Sentry was killed twice by Molecule Man before realizing how to use his powers. When he does have Molecule Man on the ropes, he has to ask the more experienced Molecule Man to return everything back to normal, which shows that Sentry was a novice at using this type of power. So was the fight plot-induced stupidity? Absolutely not, because there is actually forgotten context behind this fight. So let's talk a little bit about Molecule Man in this situation. Molecule Man during the time was not inherently depowered. However, there is a difference between being depowered and being weakened. Many writers have stated Molecule Man was not depowered, but they did not state that he was not weakened. During Dark Avengers, Molecule Man was weakened, similar to the Sentry. Owen's powers resolve around the state of his mind. We know during the arc of Dark Avengers that Molecule Man was feeling lonely and whatnot. So while this feat shouldn't inherently be looked at as an AP feat for Sentry, it's still useful when it comes to his ability to manipulate molecules and matter. So moving on, Sentry has demonstrated phenomenal sensory capabilities. For example, Sentry is capable of hearing a butterfly sneeze in Africa while he himself is in New York. Sentry can track people by sensing their aura. Sentry is capable of feeling Exetar's energy from the White Hot Room, which is far beyond the far shore. Another one of Sentry's iconic hacks is his potent telepathic capabilities and mental prowess. We've seen Sentry telepathically talk to Charles Xavier. Even Emma Frost and Charles Xavier had to combine their efforts to invade Sentry's mind, and even then, Emma Frost only had access to the White Room she built inside of Sentry's mind. Shortly after she was inside, the Void attacked her and forced her to stay inside her diamond form to avoid being killed by the Void. Oh, and let's not forget how Sentry is capable of manipulating the emotions of his opponent if necessary. A good example of this is when he manipulated the emotions of the Hulk. Okay, so that's going to round up both these combatants. I'm going to go ahead and give my thoughts on who I think wins more often than not in a inverse situation. So looking at both characters and what they bring to the table, they both have really good scaling. However, if we do take into account Sentry's other feats, especially like Merge Sentry and his other assets, obviously Sentry would scale a lot higher than Hyperion pretty easily. I think Merge Sentry would take victory pretty easily. Just scales higher into the cosmology, and he'd have AP, and he'd basically just take out Hyperion. I don't really see what Hyperion can do with the sheer difference in AP. I think Sentry just has too many monster feats just to kind of stomp out Hyperion. So if we take those current feats, especially more of his powerful showings, especially him embarrassing Thor, and other powerful characters, especially when we talk about the Void. Pretty ridiculous. I would say that Sentry would take victory if we use his current feats. I just see Sentry taking victory more often than not. Now if we dub down Sentry, obviously, and we more so talk about his fight with Green Scar Hulk, and we only use that scaling, Hyperion would probably have more of a match. You know, it wouldn't be out of his complete pay grade, but I do think that if it came down to like other assets, Sentry has a lot to work with in those fights regardless. So it get to a point where Sentry will just pretty much be like over eclipsing Hyperion. Hacks are going to be an issue as well once he starts utilizing his nasty abilities that he's used over the years, especially like sleep hacks, matter manipulation, all these crazy assets and all these other nasty abilities that Sentry has up his sleeve. I think that's going to be a huge issue, and I just see Sentry taking victory more often than not, regardless of how I slice this cake. So I personally have to lean with Sentry. Better AP, Axes, has legit solid win cons to dispatch of Hyperion. I think Hyperion's going to have a tough time dealing with Sentry. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Who do you think wins? But yes, it's been real. See you guys in the next one.